Thank you so much, Your Grace, for enlightening us on what it means to be poor, for reminding us of the wounded nature of the poor and the challenges they pose, and for inspiring us to take that one step to reach out and get involved. Friends, we are here today because we want to learn more about how we can reach out, take that one step, and better partner the poor. Let us begin, however, by watching a short video on what our fellow Singaporeans say about the poverty situation in Singapore. Please do enjoy this video. Friends, Professor Irene Ng from the National University of Singapore has conducted detailed and extensive research on the poverty situation in Singapore. Today, she will share with us her analysis of the social realities of the poor. Please welcome Professor Irene Ng.
Bishop Kikochi, Archbishop William Goh, Chairman of Caritas George Lim, and I'm sure there are other important people that I'm missing out. Please pardon me, I'm poor in political correctness and formalities. I really want to thank the organizers for today's conference and counting me worthy to stand among your spiritual giants to share. I don't claim to have done detailed analysis of poverty situation in Singapore, but I am proud to say that I am a researcher of poverty, in particular in the Singapore situation, and today I will share from what I've learned, but I don't represent NUS. I want to make that clear. I teach in the Department of Social Work, but today I represent myself in terms of what I've learned, and the second role that I've self-assigned is as a person of faith. I do want to share with you my convictions about our obligations to poor people, and I really thank Archbishop for your sharing. I want to thank also the two Madam Aunties for your sharing, and in particular Madam Sally, I think the first woman. Madam Sally, 唔該你講檸檬葉咁好啊！我屋企有蟻仔啊，所以我要去買檸檬葉要放喺屋企。All right, so I'm sorry because I have been asked to share from my research, right? So I'm an academic, so I think I might be very chim today. And you've been sitting on your seats for a long time, so if you need to take a break, walk out, get a breather, I won't be offended. Please do that. And this is the outline of what I will share. I'll start with the framework. Academics need theories. And then I'll share with you from the poverty attitudes survey I've done last year. And I think the video that you watched is a very good base for us to think about this. To share with you some facts on poverty before I share about my faith-based value proposition. And I hope that at the end we can have some dialogue about this if you have questions or thoughts. So the framework, or before that, I need to acknowledge my student Yen Kiet who helped me with some of the slides. He's somewhere around, I don't know where he is. All right, well, I think that the social realities of poverty anchors on not just the lived experience of poverty, the poverty facts, but also the society's attitudes towards poverty. And our poverty attitudes are shaped by the facts, but they're also shaped by more intrinsic ideology and values. And where do these values come from? I propose two sources. One is the historical and political development in a society, and the other is our race, our religion. And I'll give you an illustration. I think that in Singapore, we really emphasize the notion of self-reliance, of work ethic. While we may say that this comes from Asian Confucian values, I think that post-independence, we have also adopted this self-reliance, strong work ethic as a national value on which we base our development. And so we really emphasize it in our political rhetoric. And this value that we embrace as a society might be moved or not moved by the facts of poverty today. And just now in the video, people asked about new poor. What is this concept? Our society has changed a lot. The Singapore economy has changed a lot since 1965 when we gained independence. So what is this new reality? But yet we have our strong, deep-rooted ideologies, and together with the facts, this will shape our response as a nation. And today I hope to bring the attitudes and the facts closer together by sharing with you some facts as well as appealing to you based on our common faith. All right, so this, in terms of poverty attitudes, most research have traced back to this classification system by Figin. And very simply put, it breaks down into these three categories. Some people are more oriented towards an individualistic explanation for poverty, which focuses on personal deficits like lack of willpower, laziness. These days, I think people shun away from using this word laziness, but in some of the earlier writings, you would see it quite blatant. You know, it's like, oh, the lazy, poor person, right? Then the next big block of explanation is the situational reason for poverty, related to some catastrophic events such as a disaster, natural disaster, illness. And then the other big block are the institutional explanation for poverty, and this focuses on unfavorable conditions such as exploitation, lack of opportunities. Now, in overseas, when people are polled, there tends to be, right, you can imagine that richer people tend to lean towards more individualistic reasons for poverty, whereas poorer people tend to lean towards the institutional or situational reasons. There is also a dichotomy between people who have certain political affiliation. So in the US, for example, the Democratic Party members tend towards more the institutional explanation, whereas the Republicans more towards individualistic. So our policy intervention does depend on which view that we feel dominate, right? Although we probably say there's a confluence of factors, but where do we feel that it starts with, and what's the main reason for poverty? And let me share with you these trends that's been shown in the British Attitudes Survey. This top line, if I can get right, this top line is saying that poverty is mainly due to inevitable that is inevitable in modern life. And then this bottom line is that poverty is due to luck, right? And you see these two quite flat, nothing much changes. The main contention is between those who say that poverty is mainly due to laziness, that's the light purple line, and those who say it's due to injustice, that's the pink line. And you can see that since the 1980s, right, in the 80s, quite a lot of people say, oh, it's injustice, and then it comes down this period. Whereas those who say it's laziness were quite low, and then it goes up during this period, and they cross, the two lines cross. Now what's happening in Britain? The two gray blocks are the recession times. So you can see that during recessions, people become more compassionate towards poor people. Yeah? The reason that laziness is a reason of poverty comes down during this period, right? So one reason is the economic situation. But another possible reason is the political party that was in domination at that period of time. So in the 1990s, it was Tony Blair's administration, and that his administration, the Labour Party, was more liberal in terms of the policies for welfare. But then that party itself also became more conservative as British became more unequal in terms of its income distribution, and also the government budget was also getting tight. Right. So today, England, we have a coalition government that is a bit of a middle ground, and so the researchers say that as there's austerity measures and there's greater inequality in Britain, there is an increased stigmatization of the poor. What about us here in Singapore? Well, last year I conducted my own attitudes survey. I just have 440 people, which is not many, but then I think it is a sizable number that gives us some idea of the attitudes of Singaporeans. First, let's look at the definitions of poverty. The first one says, one is poor if he or she has enough to buy the things they need, but not things that people take for granted. And among these three definitions, this is the narrowest definition, meaning that this is the broadest definition of poverty, meaning that you can buy things you need, but not beyond that, yeah? Not luxuries, and just what you need. And you see that in my survey, 17 or 18% people say that this is poverty, right? Whereas in Britain it's 20%, and among the respondents that I classify as poor, it's double that number, right? Then the second definition, which is a narrower definition than the first one is poor if he or she has enough to eat and live, but not enough to buy things that they need. So just to survive, just to eat, just to live, right? But not even things they need. Here, more people say that this is a definition of poverty, and it's kind of equal between the three groups. The final definition is the narrowest, not enough to eat and live if you can't do that without going into debt, right? And this number then shoots up. Very interesting here that there's actually a lower percentage of the poor here who says that this is a definition of poverty. It could be, right, that gutsy thing like, I'm not poor, I can still get by even if I have debt. And actually in Singapore, the reality among low income is that there is debt, and they have lived with debt most of their lives. All right, then moving on to the scale of the problem. When we ask about whether they think there are very few or many poor people in Singapore, you see the numbers are fewer than in England, in Britain. Okay, and then causes of poverty. And this follows the classification by Fagan. Among the Singaporean respondents, you can see that we have kind of equal in terms of saying it's due to inevitability of modern life, but among the poor respondents, more say that it's due to inevitability. And very few poor respondents in Singapore attribute it to, not very few, but fewer than attribute it to injustice. But I think the blue one is where we want to look at, where there are fewer among the poor who attribute poverty to laziness, lack of willpower, compared to the general Singapore population, as well as the UK respondents. So to me, this actually shows some, overall, when I look at the poverty attitudes results that I have gathered, that I think Singaporeans have some compassion towards poor people, but it could be because our definition of poverty is so narrow, right? So let's look at this overall view about individualistic versus structural reasoning. As we can see, it's related. The top bubble there, right, we can start with that. In Singapore today, poor people usually are those with low education, because we are in an economy that values high skills, high education. And with low education, their wages are low, and we have heard a lot in the news about how we are making efforts to increase wages of cleaners, of security personnel, right? And that is a structural reason that we have depressed wages in Singapore, right? And then you link this with the situational reasons for poverty. In my research, very often we do hear of someone who might be injured and at work, right? And as a result, they lose their job, right? So it goes to the next bubble here, right? So it's a cycle, right? And as this person may be injured, loses a job, and then as recovery, this person might be discouraged and maybe switch to part-time because the hours are too long. In physical jobs, right? Unlike mine, where I sit in my cushy office, you do need to be on your feet a lot, right? So an injury might impact a low income job more. And so the cycle continues. So the question is, when we think of our response as a society, where do you think the point of intervention is? Oh, the person must go for training, must go and upgrade himself, herself. Let's motivate the person, get a person to have the right attitude to help himself, herself. But I think today we are in a world where, despite the best efforts of people with lower education, with skills that are not in high demand in a globalized economy, that the wages they get, the kind of job conditions they get, might not be enough for them to be able to survive or get out of the poverty situation. Oops, coming down. And so now I share with you some numbers. These are not from myself. They're done by the Land Center for Social Innovation in the Singapore Management University. And can you see, is it too small? And you have handouts, right? Well, I just go through very briefly. Right? Yeo Liam Kong has done the first set of study, right, by Yeo Liam Kyong. He used this estimate that actually our Department of Statistics has come up with, but they don't produce this regularly. And it's based on what is the average amount spent on basic necessities by people who live in 1 or 2 room flats. Then they multiply it by like 1.25 to account for other expenses such as transport, and other necessities. And this amount, he pitches it at about 1,250 to 1,500 per month. And by this estimate, he says that there are about 10 to 12% in Singapore who are poor, 10 to 12%. Another study by Jacqueline Low, she used the cut-off that we in Singapore use to give financial assistance. And at that time, it was at about $1,500 per month as well. So this is slightly higher, about 12 to 14%. Now, this is just about spending on necessities. And I think just now, one of our aunties shared when she talked about the aspirations to be able to keep working, right? And good health is important to be able to keep working. But besides that, about children, aspirations for children to study hard, to get ahead. So if we want to think from that perspective that we want to help low-income families beyond just meeting basic needs, but to be able to get out of poverty, to have an intergenerational perspective, then we look at the next measure, which comes from the Straits Times. If we think about how much a family in Singapore needs, not just for necessities, but also in terms of spending on things like computers, books, to invest in human capital, then they estimate about 23 to 26% of Singaporeans are poor. Right? That's a large number, right? Depending on what your definition and measure of poverty is. Now, those three that I mentioned are called absolute measures of poverty. Around the world, people also use relative measures of poverty. For example, in international research, we often use 50% of median household income. And Hong Kong recently has adopted this as their poverty measure. So a country that adopts a measure like this is signaling that we are thinking of poverty in terms of who are at the bottom and that we have a responsibility towards them. Also in terms of relative positions, right? So here, for Singapore, 50% of median household is roughly about 2,500, and with this estimate, it's about 20 to 22% of all households who are poor. Right. So some of you might think, I'm not sure about those numbers, because right now you're thinking, like, we think of poverty, say, in the developing countries, right, where it's like $125 a day. But when we think about Singapore, we think in context, in terms of our living costs, in terms of our social realities, of our experience relative to what we see that others have in Singapore. And so we come to this income inequality. Yeah? And maybe you know, maybe you don't know, because there's lots of media attention on this, that Singapore does have one of the highest income inequality in the world. And this chart I show you is actually a standardized measure where they try to standardize between different countries how they measure inequality. And on the vertical axis is what's called the market measure of inequality, right? And this red line gives you the mean among the countries, and Singapore is up here, that is above the mean in our inequality. Now, through this chart, I want to show you the effect of government transfers. After we have taken into account government assistance as well as other types of transfers we have in Singapore, the horizontal axis gives you the net Gini, all right? And when you consider government transfers, Singapore is here, way on the right of the red line, which is the mean value of inequality after Hong Kong, right? And all the other countries to our left, right? So as a society, in terms of government intervention, we're not doing as much as other countries. And these are 2010 numbers. Since then, we have rolled out a lot of programs, which I think will bring Singapore closer to UK and US, but definitely not to this side, all right? So beyond looking at income, economics, I think when we talk about the social realities of poverty, it is more than that. Low-income people tend to also have compounding of other factors which may be the reason for their poverty, or because of poverty they have these issues. I have spoken at length just now about how low education leads to low earnings in the Singapore context today, right? But low earnings is also related with poor health, poor mental health. You worry about your finances, like the low-income people. In my research, their levels of anxiety are very high. Their sense of control over their lives is very low, right? And it could be that they have an injury which causes them to have to cut down on work, and then the cycle goes on. Low earnings have also been shown to relate with family relations and children problems. You worry about finances, you quarrel with your spouse, you're not able to spend time with your child, you take it out on your child. So another spiral there, and also related to having a criminal record. Quite a substantial group of low-income recipients are people with with a criminal record. So when you look at this confluence of factors, in Singapore today, right, I think there are more structural reasons arising from globalization, and so foreign workers in Singapore or manufacturing going overseas, and so now we are focusing on service sector jobs where the wages are depressed, and at the other end where due to technological advancement, the high-skilled jobs, the salaries are going higher, right? And these factors are not unique to Singapore. Other countries are facing them too, right? And these days when you hear about the news about the situation in the Middle East, in Africa, those kind of abject poverty, we need to respond to them. But at the same time, I think we cannot neglect our own Singaporeans in this nation, which I think we're hit more by globalization because of just how open our economy is, right? The percentage of non-locals living in Singapore, for example, I don't think any other nation has got this kind of high numbers. So when we think about being poor in wealthy Singapore, beyond the numbers, right, it's about being cash poor but asset rich. It's true, most Singaporeans have a home, and among low-income Singaporeans, I think more than 50% actually own a home too. But as I said just now, a lot of them have debt, and debt related to home ownership. They can't pay the mortgage, and then when they are evicted and move to a rental housing, they can't pay the rent, right? Then there's multiple barriers, education and skills, and we can think in terms of technology access. All of us have our mobile phones with our data plans, and we know that data plans, as they move to 4G, are going to become more expensive. How much can a low-income person access this? Language. English widely used in Singapore, but low-income families come from families that don't speak English at home, so there's this additional barrier. Physical and psycho-emotional challenges, as well as family issues. Then next I put a point about being neighborhood bound. Well, because of transport costs and other costs of having to go out, a lot of them do just stay at home or around their own neighborhood, right? You think about Orchard Road, Marina Bay Sands, and things like this. Are these places that our low-income Singaporeans would be hanging out at, places that they would go to? But at the same time, they have wide media exposure. Yeah, a lot of them have TVs and they watch a lot of TV, right, to pass their time. They see all these blatant wealth, right, messages from the TV, from around them. And Singapore is so small, it's in your face. So I feel that in Singapore, while we have absolute measures that can give us a gauge for those who might not have enough to even survive in terms of food, we should be really looking at relative poverty, about inequality. And that brings me to my value proposition, which is that God cares about poverty and how his children respond to poverty. And I'd like to quote from Jeremiah chapter 5, verses 26 to 29. It says, "Among my people are the wicked who lie in wait like men who snare birds, and like those who set traps to catch people, like cages full of birds, their houses are full of deceit. They have become rich and powerful and have grown fat and sleek." Notice here, God says, among my people. I mean, people of faith, people who believe in God, are the wicked people who have become rich and powerful, grown fat and sleek. Their evil deeds have no limit. They do not seek justice. They do not promote the case of the fatherless. They do not defend the cause of the poor. Should I not punish them for this, declares the Lord. Christians tend to harp on blatant sins such as murder, stealing, but our holy God cares equally about our sin of how we treat the less fortunate brothers and sisters. And I think a modern illustration is that Singapore is wealthy, and I think the church is wealthy. We get rich, we get fat. We have our children, now we have obesity problems, right? And we work in an environment which favors businesses. I think our laws in Singapore, they're legal, right? But we squeeze those at the bottom. We expect them to work 12-hour shifts. We change the work from full-time to part-time so we don't have to pay benefits, medical leave. All these are legal in the eyes of the law. And I think most of us here is someone's supervisor, someone's boss. Do we think that our staff deserve rest days, that they deserve to work 8 hours and not 12 hours? Do you think that they deserve a break to attend to their family matters with flexible hours? And what can we do to make that happen? As a church, as a people of faith, I think we should not throw our hands up and just say, oh, this is the kind of society we live in, and perpetuate that. The government has a role to ensure social protection and is expanding its social protection. What is the society's response? Christians make up 18.3% of Singapore, and if you count other people with faiths, we are in the majority. Only 17% of Singaporeans say they don't have a religion. And so we need to respond to this. And I'll come back to my point just now about our political and historical development, that strong entrenched mindset about self-reliance, about the strong work ethic. I think that we have to rethink that paradigm. And let me share with you about myself. My undergrad, I did economics, and I was taught about the importance and value of free markets, laissez-faire economics, trickle-down economics. Even after 7 years of working with low-income youths in Lengkok Bahru, my belief in how to help them is must fix the attitudes, help them get motivated, tell them must study hard, give them the right incentives, the right carrots and sticks to help them get out of their situations. Well, good thing I went to pursue studies overseas, and I realized how much a Singaporean and a Singaporean economist I am. I went to a church that had an adult Bible study on poverty, and the first session was sharing by a social worker who worked in a soup kitchen. And this ignorant Singaporean, I asked, if you keep giving them food all the time, won't they just come back for the food and not want to work or don't want to help themselves? And what she said really set me thinking. She said, it's not about the food. When they come in, we talk to them, we give them value, we show that they're valuable, and when they find that they are valuable, they will want to go out and contribute back. So at that time, the significance of what she said didn't really hit me, but since then I've been really pondering, and I think today my reprimand to myself is, it's not about the food, stupid, it's really about the person, right? And I started to read the Bible for passages about poverty, and I realized how much God cares about poverty, that poor people have a special place in God's heart. I mean, a God who loves the pauper and the king equally, will he be pleased with the kind of inequality we have in Singapore? I believe not. And what is the church doing about it? Right? And instead, in the Old Testament, God's economy at work is every Jubilee year, all debts are cancelled and the land returned. The rich can't get richer, the poor can't get poorer. What kind of an economic system do we work in today? Right? And I did my overseas studies. I was doing my PhD in economics and social work. And the economists who taught me are not really the kind of economics that I learned as an undergrad. They believe in doing more for poor people, and I thank God for their teaching in thinking more strategically about interventions for the poor and not necessarily just championing free markets and throwing our hands up. So today I'm a reformed Christian and a reformed economist. Right, so I hope that I have helped you think more about where your alignment is by sharing with you the facts as well as my stories in my journey spiritually. And my value proposition is that people of faith have a moral and social obligation towards the poor. And I'm still growing and learning, having to remind myself to live simply, to live counterculturally in this blatantly wealth-conscious society. And where does this leave you? I hope you can respond with your questions and thoughts, but before I leave you, I thought I should share something uplifting. If we choose to live in solidarity with the poor, and if we choose to live counterculturally, Hebrews 13:5 and 6 says, if you keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? I think these verses are helpful for brothers and sisters who live in poverty, but they are also helpful for us in materialistic and wealthy Singapore, so that we don't have to fear not being able to keep up, right? And thus prevent us from obedience to God in this. The Lord is our helper. He will never leave nor forsake us. All right. So, not tea break yet. How much time? Yep. Right.